Welcome back to Ontario Cryptids. I'm so glad you're here for another episode of some fascinating encounters. Today I have another 4 stories to share, and each one is more intriguing than the last. If you love hearing these mysterious encounters, don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another episode. And if you have an encounter of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Send your stories to ontariocryptids@gmail.com and it just might be featured in a future episode. Now, sit back and relax and let's dive into this week's incredible encounter stories. While camping in the Cowichan Valley, we heard an animal circle us, then saw it briefly but clearly in the light of our fire. It ran off when a loud dirt bike approached. A friend in the same area says he saw a Sasquatch dart across the road and over a fence while he was driving. He said it used a tree to launch itself into the bush. The tree was uprooted and it is still there. Another person near here says his girlfriend saw one while the two were sleeping in his car in the woods. His girlfriend noticed something looking in the window, then watched it walk around the truck and then leave. There had been some direct vocalization between us and these animals. This has occurred twice now in the same location. It returned the following calls: whistles, whoops, grunts, clicks, and it mimicked everything. The next time we went to this area, we heard a large branch hitting a tree, but in sequence, 2 to 3 taps, with about a 5-second gap for about 30 seconds. We made whooping calls, but it only returned with a couple of taps. Then we heard it leave. One day we were down by the river having a beer, taking a break from 4x4ing, when I heard what sounded like a hammer driving a nail. It was sequenced and we were the only people out in the area. It occurred 3 times in a half-hour span, very loud and distinct. One night we heard a whooping call 3 times. It was faint but distinct. We think there may be many other sightings in the Cowichan Valley area that no one has reported. It was late September that I was visiting a friend who lived at the edge of the Chautauqua National Forest. Chautauqua National Forest is probably not listed on the New York Forest Registry because it is technically on Seneca National Reservation property. Locate Jamestown, New York on the map or Lilydale. It would be the forest that borders this property going to the north. It is about an hour south of Buffalo. My friend and I had gotten up early to hike one of the nature trails that go through the park. This part of western New York is about an hour south of Buffalo and in between the Seneca Nation. The tourist season of the summer had ended and it was not yet deer hunting season, but the foliage was still thick. My friend and I started on a trail early around 6:30 a.m. in the morning, and it was still dusk outside and the sun was just beginning to rise. After about 20 minutes into our hike, we come to what looks like a marsh-like environment with fallen trees and some open spaces. We had stopped to survey the area, just looking around at how beautiful the scenery was. I would like to say that at this point, my friend, who is also a professional photographer, wished he had brought his camera, and in a few moments I wished he had as well. As we stood there, we got the strange sense that we were being watched. I thought this strange considering the remoteness of the area and how early it was. As I turned around to see what was behind us, we heard a movement in the bushes. At this point, I thought it was a bear. Bigfoot had not even entered my mind at all. We both began to make a lot of noise and talking loud enough so that if it was a bear, it would run off instead of charging. After a while, we realized that it was not a bear or any other animal, because of all the noises that we were making, and whatever it was in the thickets had not moved. At this point, we thought it had to be a human, but as we neared the thickets about 50 feet from where we were standing, we heard heavy breathing and saw through the thicket what appeared to be a large dark form either laying down or squatting. My friend became frightened, and even at this point, Bigfoot had not entered either of our thoughts. My friend urged me to continue down the original trail and back to where we had started. We were already deep into the woods and had at least another good 20 minutes of brisk walking or running if whatever was in the bushes decided to follow us. As we started down the trail, whatever was in the bush darted behind the nearest tree and began to follow us. After a few minutes of this, it became aggravated. So my friend and I thought we would stop and hide behind the nearest tree so that we could see what this thing would do. As it peered out from behind the side of the tree, what I saw is something I will never forget. When I stared at the tree and bushes that this thing was hiding behind, and I will say not well, at what appeared to be a 6-foot level of a branch was a dark, heavy-shouldered and part of a massive forearm. At this point, I knew exactly what I was looking at. It was a 7-foot-tall Sasquatch, and with all of my nerve, I tried to get my friend to see from my angle. When my friend moved over to my side to get a look at this creature, it moved just enough to see its torso, and that was all my friend needed to see, and he took off. I was left standing there wondering if the reports of this thing chasing people were true. But all it did was stand there waiting for me to make my move. This was the point I was scared the most. I didn't know what to do, so I began to talk to it out loud and said, "We are not here to hurt you. We are just moving through." I said this in a calming voice, despite the fact that my nerves were as frayed as they could be. I started down the trail in a calm walking gait. The Sasquatch just kept right up with me about 75 feet behind me, always staying just out of my line of view. It stopped following me about half a mile from the end of the trail. When I caught up to my friend, he was too shaken up to talk about it and has never mentioned it again. I have been back to the area since this incident, and my friend will not go into the woods by himself and only with a great number of people. I would like to add that there was no smell associated with this sighting and no vocalization, only heavy breathing and what sounded like a low guttural growl and some form of what sounded to me to be lip smacking. Several months later, I had read that in Jamestown, New York, there had been a sighting of a white Bigfoot that chased a group of kids off a bike path not far from where I had my sighting. I have to start by saying that I'm a bit nervous about sending this letter because of all the hoopla that comes along with it. I was 14 at the time in 1988. A friend of mine and I had waited all week to go dirt bike riding in the woods near my house. It had rained all week and we knew that the trails would be sloppy, but we were eager to ride just the same. We rode in the woods pretty much all that day and it was starting to get dark. So I had to head home because I didn't have headlights on my bike. We rode through this one part of the trail that was narrow and dark, and just on the other side was a small opening, and that is where I waved my buddy down because I had to stop and relieve myself. Where we pulled over was kind of muddy, so I asked my friend to hold on to my bike so that I didn't have to put the kickstand down. I stepped off the trail about 5 or 6 feet, and proceeded to relieve myself when my buddy started screaming for me to hurry up. Both of our bikes were still running and I couldn't figure out why he was trying to take off on me. I turned and yelled at him to stop pissing around, and he had this look in his eyes that he just saw the devil himself. I turned to see what he was looking at, and at the edge of the woods, not more than 30 feet away, was a figure that stood, I'm guessing, at least 8 to 11 feet tall. It had very long and powerful long arms and dark eyes. The hair on his body was long and matted. I ran and hopped on my bike and took off all in one motion, and I could feel something pulling on my coat. Finally, I got away from whatever was chasing me, and I was so scared that I never had the time to finish what I started on the trail. I ended up finishing it in my trousers. The next day, my buddy and I went back in the middle of the afternoon with a tape measure and a camera. We measured the spot where the man was standing, and it was over 10 feet, covered in short, dark hair. We saw some of the tracks where it had been chasing me up the trail. The whole time that we were out there, we both felt like we were being watched. So we got the hell out of there again just as fast as our bikes would take us. It has been over 15 years now, and the only person that I've ever discussed this with was my friend that I was with that day. My sense of being watched goes back to the age of 11, back in 1973 at Scout Camp. It was mid to late summer, on a 5-mile hike along the Wapsi River. The group of about 6 with our instructor set out with a goal of completing requirements for a hiking skill award. One of the tasks was to drop off one individual from the group and have them flank the group without being seen. I remember I was the last to be dropped off. I was concentrating on every footstep, careful not to step on a stick, as if I were a Native American. That's when I sensed the feeling of someone behind me flanking me. When I snapped my head back, I felt the presence of someone ducked behind a large tree about 30 yards to my rear. Feeling the hair stand on end, I got creeped out and spent no time catching up with the group. The rest of the day was normal and went about our routine. That night, after cooking, we cleaned up and had a bonfire. It must have been a new moon cycle because it was very dark out. I remember hearing a whippoorwill in the distance walking to my tent. Our tents were mountain style, no floor, with front and back flaps, tied a third from the top and 2/3 down. 2 cots on either side and a backpack rack between at the rear. This was my 3rd year at camp. I was patrol leader, and my assistant patrol leader, Kevin, bunked on the other side. For whatever reason, Kevin had one of those wind-up alarm clocks with the 2 bells on top on the rack. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep, and I've never been a light sleeper. 12:30, I woke up to the sound of something crawling through the laurel behind the tent, which were set up in a thickly wooded area about a mile from the river. At first, I thought it was a possum or a raccoon until I heard it breathing. The lung capacity was incredible. I lay there as still as possible, trying to control my breathing, listening to my visitor come out of the bush and stand behind the tent, about 5 feet away. It stepped bipedally slowly to my side, no more than a few feet between a tree and the tent. At this point, I had ruled out someone trying to F with me, because it was so dark and there was no flashlight. My heart was racing as I stood there. I felt the blood pounding through my body. After it felt like an eternity, it made a very deep grunting sound, followed by 2 birds flying into the tree above the tent. They had a difficult time landing, and a second grunt sent them flying off. At this point, it slowly took a few steps back towards the back of the tent. Between my heart pounding and the alarm clocking ticking so loudly, I believe it was trying to figure out what the ticking sound was. Then I heard the canvas being stretched open above where it was tied. Laying there, I managed to have my knife out of its sheath in my hand with my head under my sleeping bag. I heard its head come through the canvas and I blacked out. During this whole time, I never smelt anything and managed not to lose my bodily functions. When I woke up, it was still dark, about 4:30 a.m. Just as freaked out as when I passed out, I lay there till it started to get light. I got dressed, and when I came out of the tent, I found that the stakes had been pulled on and half the dining fly was covering part of the picnic table. I walked around the tent and seen where it had crawled through the brush. there appeared to be a tunnel about 3.5 feet wide and 10 feet long through the thicket. Dan, our scoutmaster of olive skin tone, came out of his tent about 30 yards away looking as white as a sheet. I asked him if he heard anything last night. He said he heard someone going through the camp kitchen that was located at the end of the picnic table. I asked if he had seen them, and he didn't. So this was Wednesday, and the day when parents showed up in the late afternoon for a visit. I was packed up and had no plans on staying there till Saturday. Had a long talk with my folks and was pissed that my dad didn't believe me and wouldn't let me go home with them. That night, I jammed a stick in the alarm clock to stop it from ticking and put Kleenex in my ears so I wouldn't hear anything waking me up. The following January, I was back at the same camp for a winter jamboree. It consisted of a sled race through an obstacle course, and overnight we were using troop tents with floors set up on straw with about 6 inches of snow on the ground. I had a good time, but I hadn't forgotten about the last time I was there. That night after the bonfire, we headed for our bed in the tents. I was at the back. Next to me was my cousin Paul and 2 other scouts towards the door. At around 12 p.m., I woke up hearing something going on in the next tent over at my feet. Something was digging around between the tents and heard someone say something. And the next thing I knew, I felt digging in the straw beside me. The canvas was stretching and something was trying to get in. That's when I heard the heavy breathing, only it seemed to have congested lungs and was laying on the back of the tent next to me. I swear it sounded like the seams were splitting apart. I kept scooting towards my cousin because this thing was huge. It worked its way around to the side of the tent and was laying over the top of my sleeping bag. At this point, I was pinned in and scooting down in the bag, and I remember having my nose next to the zipper so that I could breathe. As it moved its way towards the front, it was now laying on my cousin, who halfway woke up thinking it was me and told me to knock it off as he hit it. Thud. This son of a bitch was massive. Still pinned in my sleeping bag, I heard the guys closest to the door rip a loud fart, and I guess our visitor decided he couldn't get in or wanted to and left. Able to get my head free of this mammoth, I told Paul that wasn't me he hit and that I thought it was a Bigfoot. The next morning, I heard the guys talking from the other tent about last night. I asked him what he said. He said, I wouldn't lay there with my knife out. I looked around the tent for tracks, but the snow was too packed. I didn't find any here, and all along the side of the tent was frozen drool. This encounter wasn't as scary, but I felt sorry for it since it seemed to be sick. Guess I'm not surprised there wasn't tracks with all the boot prints from us. I never smelt anything that time as well, just glad that I didn't suffocate. The following month, 13 miles from there, along the Cedar River, a Boy Scout from a different troop disappeared from a camping trip and was never found. David Paulides wrote about him in his Missing 411. I remember telling my dad at the time that I thought a Bigfoot got him. Thank you all for listening until the end. I hope you enjoyed these 4 encounter stories and found them as intriguing as I did, especially that last one. If you enjoy this content and want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member for exclusive perks. Now, let's acknowledge the current OC members. I would like to thank Elizabeth, Jim, Diana, and Teresa for the contribution and support as members of the OC membership program. Your support is truly appreciated. And of course, don't forget to hit that like button, the subscribe button, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another episode. If you have an encounter story to share, I'd love to hear it. Send it to ontariocryptids@gmail.com, and I would be honored to share your story with the OC community. Wishing you all a great week ahead, and be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode on Ontario Cryptids.